It's the Wonkhe Show. We talk NSS, governance, and the new student representatives. It's all coming up.
You know, listening and learning how people operate, for people who are probably quite young and quite inexperienced, it's an absolute inoculation of experience of higher level leadership and management that not many people get in their kind of first steps in their career. So.
Welcome to the Wonkhe Show, your direct way into higher education, policy, people and politics. I'm your host, Rachel Firth, coming to you live from Swansea this morning and here to scull across the swimming pool of HE policy. As usual, we have three incredible guests. In leafy Oxfordshire, we have Mary Curnock Cook, Serial Non-Exec Director. Mary, give us your highlight of your week, please.
Oh, well, apart from the amazing Wonkhe Counting the Cost conference, my highlight was actually yesterday hearing Andy Haldane, who's the chief economist at the Bank of England, and he was speaking at an Open University 50th anniversary panel thingy. And he described the further education sector as the collapsed left lung of education, which should be resuscitated urgently. And then Andy Westwood on Twitter tweeted a collection of metaphors for FE, including Kenneth Baker's enduring Cinderella sector. Then Lord Turnbull in the Lords calling FE a blasted wasteland. And then Augur with the, I thought, rather less imaginative missing middle. And anyway, I've got the collapsed left lung at the top of my metaphorical league table.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for mentioning the kind of the cost conference. If you want to catch up on that, listeners, it's all on wonkhe.com. You can find out what happened on the day. And in York, we have Pete Quinn, HE consultant and guest lecturer of education at the University of Hong Kong. Pete, your highlight of the week, please.
Well, I had a great day earlier this week with Student Minds, working with an accommodation provider on some training that we're co-delivering. But I think my highlight's a personal one in that as a lifelong New Order fan, my daughter at school is about to perform True Faith, which is an iconic New Order song. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be one of those moments when I may have something in my eye.
Oh, how wonderful. And what instrument does she play?
Well, she's just singing. She's in true Bernard Sumner style, but the learning idea of this term for her class is 80s icons, which makes me feel very old, but it's good that they're still studying the classics.
The classics, indeed. I think that's what classics at Oxford is, actually. I think you just studied the 80s. And in London, we have Wonkhe's editor-in-chief, Mark Leach. Mark, give us your moment of the week, please.
Hi, Rachel. It's a real tie for me this week between two moments, so I'm going to cheat and give you both. First was my first ever board meeting as a governor of Middlesex University, which I'm absolutely thrilled to be joining this year. It was just really fascinating meeting, and I learnt a lot. The second one is my interview with Philip Augur at Counting the Cost, our event on his review earlier in the week, which was an odd moment in that he, despite having published a review, kind of didn't really want to defend it or talk about any of its detail. And I'm not sure how well he came off to an audience of higher education wonks. He said his line was that, well, he's written 200 pages, so he's had his say. But then when pushed on any of the kind of controversial points and recommendations, he didn't really want to discuss them, and then said kind of, it's goodbye from me. So I think this could be the last we see of Philip Augur. Take of that what you will.
So we start this week with the National Student Survey. Annual census of nearly 500,000 students across the UK results are in. So Pete, what did we learn from the NSS this year?
Well, just to be clear for those who don't know, it's a final year student only survey, and this for this recent output, there was the result of 330,000 students had answered, 84% of whom were satisfied, which is up a percentage point from last year. But as you would expect, there's varied satisfaction between different courses at universities, and different universities have different satisfaction levels too. Assessment and feedback seem to be one of the areas where there were still low levels of satisfaction. And there's been a small average rise in satisfaction and a small average fall in dissatisfaction. I think at the root of it is it's an imperfect tool. I think a lot of people would agree. And it's in the granular details that the focus is needed. And although we've got the quantitative data, I always find in reading the comments from various NSS surveys is where you get to the heart of the matter.
Well, I just think that annual surveys are. Pete's absolutely right. It's an imperfect tool. And a survey which takes a snapshot of just final year students, at one moment in time in the year is not going to really give us granular information about satisfaction at a university. And like others, I think it's due for an overhaul. I think we should be doing much more frequent pulse surveys that go across all years, and we'd get a much better idea of what's going on in the sector.
Mark, are you satisfied with the National Student Survey?
Well, I mean, there's obviously issues with NSS. There has been since the beginning. Averaging out the experience of fine arts students and nursing students across one institution tells you very little, as DK put on his analysis earlier this week. I think that there are always useful things to learn, though, inside the data, and there are genuine improvements that can be made as a result of them. So the classic one is always about feedback on assessment, and that's something that always scores low and has done again. And if it's an impetus to improve internally in an institution, if the scores are not coming out too well, then I think that's definitely a good thing. I'm also interested in the kind of the sector movement. I mean, a league table of just NSS isn't very helpful, but it's quite interesting to see some of the movement around at a provider level that we've had this year. So institutions that have done previously very, very well in NSS, like Lincoln and Buckingham, notably, have fallen down this year. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but also others who've also done not so well in the past have moved up. So LSE, for example, saw an increase of 7 percentage points. That's an institution that's always struggled with NSS because of its makeup of students and kind of provision. So I think there's an interesting story on a sector level. There's also, of course, the data we have about student unions, and they've now been put in there as a question, satisfaction with student unions for the last couple of years, and a very mixed picture for them in these results. Again, the sort of thing that should hopefully lead to some soul searching and perhaps some positive improvement. So on that level, I think I think we can use NSS for kind of for good rather than for evil, but it sort of takes a bit of work in the institution, I think.
Yeah, and there'll be people in institutions poring over the written responses. There'll be one or two poor souls in each institution will have had the job of having to read line by line pretty much every single comment that students have made from their institution. But they are very powerful comments, and that really does get to the heart of the issue. I just wanted to pick up on something to do with the feedback on assessment, because we ran a conference that was kindly hosted by the University of Bath recently, which was to do with inclusive assessment, and there were some really good examples of inclusive feedback mechanisms and ways of giving feedback to students about their academic work that they could engage with, that they could really appreciate and really feel that they'd been responded to. And I know that many of the kind of dissatisfactions come from scribbled comments in margins, rather than someone having time, and it doesn't need to take too much time, but time to feed back to students, because they've come into university through a massive feedback loop now from schools, and from many student lives are kind of reliant around feedback and recognition, and that really needs to be worked on clearly. But there are really good and innovative ways of doing that. So just agreeing with Mark that there are some real opportunities for good news stories, and for really taking the results of this imperfect tool and putting them into practice in an effective way.
So we're agreed it's an imperfect tool, but a necessary tool, and it can be a useful one. Mary, if I can bring you back in that, in the kind of first round, you mentioned it wasn't the most perfect of survey, however necessary.
Yeah, I mean, you see what happens in universities to make sure that they're addressing issues in NSS and around the survey time. And, it clearly puts universities kind of on point to address the issues that they're likely to get bad feedback in. And that must be a good thing overall. It
also, Pete mentions the feedback loop, and I think it's probably possible to overstate, but it's a really core component. The NSS results are a really core component of a number of different measures of the sector. So obviously it's in TEF, although its influence in TEF has been dramatically downscaled from the early iterations of the exercise. But if you look at things like the Guardian League tables, which focus heavily on the student experience, NSS is really important. And which obviously has an impact on then student decision making about where they're going to apply. The other place it's really important, and we're going to come on to this later, is in governance. So it's one of those kind of KPIs that boards of governors can use to judge the effectiveness of their executive team. And there's no university in the land that doesn't want to improve its student experience. We've seen numerous examples of where a consistent failure to improve in NSS results has contributed to vice chancellors getting the chop. And you could argue, well, that's probably a good thing if it means that people are moving in the right direction improvement wise, but it also, I guess, it just ups the stakes somewhat internally and across a number of institutions which either need to improve or maintain a hard-won position.
I just think we often talk about consultation fatigue or survey fatigue, and at least this one does give us an insight, and it's got a large response rate. But I know that it's really difficult to move away from NSS only because students feel really overwhelmed with the amount of feedback that's sought from them on an ongoing basis. So I think the NSS is probably here to stay for a little while yet, albeit that it doesn't quite do the job that we wish it would.
I think it's also worth noting that this year's results bring up the response rate to the pre-boycott era. So in 2017, there was a student boycott of NSS, which hit the numbers of students replying to the survey and saw a bit of a breakdown, I think, in the kind of consensus about how what NSS is for and how it's used. But I guess with the boycott now kind of in the rearview mirror and the response rate back up to pre-boycott levels, I think that whole question seems largely behind us.
Right, let's see who's been blogging for us this week.
My name's Lee Dudding. I'm a Data Insight Officer at University, and this week on Wonkhe, I delve into the latest Ofwat statistical release, which contains data on the number of GCSE, AS and A-level subject entries in 2019. With a view to seeing how policy may be impacting subject demand at level 2 and level 3, and how this then might follow through to subject demand at degree level. So I think the main takeaways from this piece are that the hard science and the social sciences have both seen growth at GCSE and A-level over the last 3 years, whereas arts and humanities have seen decline over the last 3 years. So performing arts, for example, has seen decline of 38% at GCSE and 53% at A-level over the last 3 years. Media and drama have also seen decline over the same period. English has declined by 20% at A-level over the last 3 years. And I think really what we're seeing now is the impact of the English baccalaureate coming into effect. Subjects that have seen growth at A-level are generally those that are covered by the EBAC, whereas those that have seen decline are those that aren't within the EBAC. So I think perhaps we're seeing students more likely to take those subjects at GCSE, which is then following through to subject interest at A-level, and also may follow through to the same interests at degree level. So I suppose the question is, what are the implications of this for the sector, and how is the sector ready to respond?
Marco Thomas, Pro-Vice Chancellor of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Greenwich in London. This week in Wonkhe, my article tries to drill down into the much vaunted value discussion in higher education, particularly in the light of the Augur Review. What interests me is what is happening right now across the sector in the arts and humanities, where courses are being cut and student numbers have decreased. In the piece, I examine why students are tending to choose these subjects less and less, and chart the decline back to the crisis of arts, music, and modern foreign languages teaching in secondary schools. My concern is that these vital subjects are becoming the sole domain of richer students whose parents can afford to send them for private lessons. Worse still, I see our universities colluded with a funding system that has propagated the situation and made it worse. So we have the arts and humanities in terminal decline, while the business school and STEM are in a meteoric state of ascendancy. Ultimately, the piece is a kind of call to action, with the aim of turning around the notion of value, social, cultural, as well as economic, and understanding it in ways that actually afford society with the benefits of a more egalitarian and equitable higher education system which values all disciplines equally. I'm just going to do that last paragraph again, if that's okay. Ultimately, the piece is a call to action with the aim of turning around the notion of value, social, cultural, as well as economic, and understanding it in ways that actually afford society with the benefits of a more egalitarian and equitable higher education system which values all disciplines.
Now, next up, we talk governance, as we saw a university respond to an Office for Students investigation this week. The university being investigated was Montfort University, and in their response, they acknowledged that its governance was inadequate and that the governing body did not provide sufficient and robust oversight of the university's leadership. So, Mary, what did you make of all this?
Well, I mean, this is an unprecedented statement from DMU, and I think it'll be a low point in its history. It'll become a kind of an enduring bookmark in its history. It'll be a reference point that lots of future decisions and discussions will relate back to in the future. And I agree. I mean, that statement was devastating. It's about as bad as it gets in my governance book. The statement goes on to imply that there was pretty liberal use of university funds for international travel, including with partners of staff and governing bodies. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I thought went out in the 90s, didn't it? Whistleblowers not being treated properly, governing body members conflicted through consultancy contracts. I mean, this is just astonishing that this happens in this day and age. Remco wasn't independent in its decisions. The university broke its own financial regulations, including on procurement, and basically that the governance was not independent, and it was riddled with conflicts of interest. It's not a pretty story at all. And apart from anything else, I think it'll probably mark the start of an ultra cautious era of governance and leadership in the university, and it's that might do the university more harm in the long term than obviously the very damaging headlines of the moment. I also thought what was interesting was the OFS statement about the investigation. And the key passage says, given the university's cooperation with the investigation, the action it's already taken to address our concerns and its clear plan for future actions, we've not made any formal findings on this occasion. We've now closed our investigation and will continue to monitor the university's progress, blah, blah. And then they also publish the action plan, and there's a follow-up quote, blah, blah, blah. Then the OFS will use the full range of our enforcement powers where necessary to investigate and resolve similar compliance concerns. And I think some regulation experts will want to contemplate the real seriousness of the failings at this university. And then this sort of naming and shaming response from the regulator, which doesn't really go much further than naming and shaming, and then obviously generally monitoring future compliance. More widely, I think university chairs across the sector will be dusting off their own terms of reference. They'll be rereading the CUC Code of Governance, and they'll be rereading the relevant OFS regulations, looking to ensure that they really do have adequate oversight over the kind of things that went so badly wrong at DMU. I think critically they'll want to ensure that there's more than one member of the governing body looking at these things, and I think they'll want to become super sensitive to the formation of cliques within the membership of a governing body, which does sometimes happen. I'm a member of the Open University Council, and I'm certainly myself kind of rereading some of the key documents to make sure the ground is properly covered. I think anyone on a governing body who's relaxing and thinking it wouldn't happen here should read the DMU statement and realise that it probably could happen anywhere if the governing body is too passive and too ready to let the university leadership run the governing body's business. And if they're not taking very seriously the responsibilities and the accountability that goes along with the job, then they could be cruising for a bruising. But I mean, what did others make of this story?
I think there's probably it's a very good case study of the kind of HIPPO principle, the highest paid person's opinion, and I think a lot of things just got left, to tick on and tick over. I'd just like to recognise the difficulty that this brings to the really dedicated staff at DMU, because we're focusing on the top table and the governors there, but there's real if you've looked at this and you look at the impact it's had on morale there and on their frontline staff, it's really tricky and really difficult. I don't see so many comments coming out from students on their dissatisfaction, but I think you're absolutely right, Mary. I think other places will really need to take a long hard look, and very much it could happen there, and it must not happen there. Unfortunately, it's one of a series of episodes where the governance and leadership haven't moved as rapidly and as quickly as change in higher education as a whole has. And I think accountability is the key word. And I think it'd be a really good opportunity for, the 39-point checklist might be a really good tick box exercise to look at for most governance in terms of are we at risk from this? What can we do about this issue? But I fear it won't be the last. And I don't think it was particularly unknown that there were issues there. So I think we really do need to take this as a serious card-marked situation.
So it's quite extraordinary the level of breakdown of the governance at Montfort University that its own statement and OFS's statement set out. Although we don't know the actual details, we have the sort of categories of things that went wrong, which are pretty much everything that can go wrong when it comes to governance. But the Times, for example, though, did report that the former VC Dominic Shellard owned shares in a company owned by the chair of the Remuneration Committee, who then increased Dominic Shellard's pay from £286,000 to £350,000 a year, and stuff like that. It's kind of extraordinary that it can happen in a major public university like De Montfort. I think I agree with both Pete and Mary that there's obviously an opportunity to use this, to reflect and other institutions about what could go wrong, how to improve processes to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. But I mean, Pete hinted at it, but people have known that things have been going wrong at DMU for quite a long time, and we've seen a few things reported now in the public domain, in the press, about the dodgy dealings at the top table. But there was a systemic problem for a number of years, as vast numbers of former DMU employees will attest to. I know many personally who witnessed all kinds of bad behaviour over a number of years, and got out to kind of save themselves and their own careers. It was not a surprise to them or anyone else in the sector who have been very well aware of this kind of stuff for a number of years, that this was all going to come to a head.
By who? You say that if people had intervened sooner, but who should have done that sooner?
So, there were so many stories circulating, so many things said directly to us about what was going on there, and we don't cover what happens at individual universities, particularly on Wonkhe. We're interested on a system level, and also very difficult to go on kind of rumour, anecdote, hearsay, anything like that. And so a very difficult issue for us to pick up, particularly given it involves so many people kind of on a personal level. I feel like there's been a real collective failure of the sector to deal with what was going on at DMU, which started with, I think, a culture of bullying and harassment, and ended in total breakdown of governance and dodgy dealings that are clearly short of criminal activity, but probably not that far off. Although, of course, there's no suggestion of that in the OFS statement. So I think that the other thing to say is that OFS's predecessor Hefke has been doing an awful lot of kind of baseline activism on governance over a number of years. Most famously intervened in London Met and placed itself on the London Met board. It's quite interesting to me that the OFS response now, which is meant to be a much kind of tougher regulator, is to present a couple of dozen recommendations which seem fairly anodyne. The one that jumped out at me was sending governors on training courses. Well, that all seems a bit baseline. There's clearly a bigger soul searching to be done about how a situation like this can emerge in the first place over so many years, when so much of it was known by other people in the sector, thanks to whistleblowers and others coming in and out of the institution. So I feel like there's a kind of collective breakdown as well as an institutional one, and I don't know what to take from it yet, but I feel like a lot of it probably could have been avoided.
It's also, I think, so slightly naive to think that just going on a training course would train you that you shouldn't have shares in a business owned by.
It just seems like common sense.
Exactly, you shouldn't need training to understand that. Pete, you want to come back in on this?
Totally agree with your last point as well. That the Nolan principles are pretty obvious even to even to the layperson. I really hope this doesn't overshadow DMU's progress in other areas. They've got a really good approach to inclusive teaching and learning. They're kind of at the forefront of that strategically. So I hope that they're having to rein in some of their activities clearly doesn't affect that. I think the culture change piece that Mark touched on is really critical. And I think many institutions, there's a lot of data to show that bullying and harassment is taking place all over organizations, whether it's in the higher education sector or not. But there's a really interesting emerging position that some organizations are taking called radical transparency, and that's being completely open. And I think that really needs to happen in many more of our institutions. Radical transparency in the fact is how we're going to respond to these difficult situations that we've got ourselves into and how we can re-emerge from those. And I think London Met's a really good example of that. London Met has radically transformed from the institution it was and is pushing forward. So there's a great model we've got already of what can happen in organizations like that. And the previous VC of London Met, I think, wrote a really interesting piece that I read on leadership and how he had to approach leadership in an organization that was embattled and had reached a low ebb, which I would agree. I would argue that DMU looks like at the moment, certainly from a governance perspective. But I hope that the staff and students there aren't as adversely impacted as this is, as might be possible.
Now it's time for Yes, but does it correlate? Here to set this week's correlation question, back from his break, it's Wonkhe's associate editor, David Kernahan.
Hi, it's me again. Back doing Yes, but does it correlate? Sorry about that. With both Leo and NSS dropping in the past week or so, I couldn't pass up the chance to put the two together. Looking at the much maligned creative arts graduates from the class of 2014-15, I plotted median salary 1 year after graduation against overall satisfaction as measured by percentage agree in the NSS. Would institutions where students are more satisfied also see graduates with better paid jobs? Does it correlate?
It was interesting to see that a number of arts specialist institutions were in the bottom 5 or 10 of the NSS. And I remember talking to one dean of an arts faculty who said, "Yes, but Mary, we're teaching these people not to be content," which I thought was quite an interesting take on kind of creative types. So I would guess that we know creative arts people are at the lower end of the pay spectrum, and it looks like they're also might be at the lower end of satisfaction or contentment. So I'd say it does correlate.
So DK likes to play games with us. The answer is almost certainly the counterintuitive one. I wonder if, without trying to overthink it too much, the experience of, as kind of Mary alluded to, the discontented higher education experience of immersing yourself in the creative arts, learning about it in a way that's very hard to quantify, made this cohort hungry to get out there in the world and make something for themselves on the back of that. So I'm going to go with yes.
There are lots of reasons for no, but I think it's 5 years ago, and there may have been they may have been the halcyon days. Who knows? It's such a long time ago in the world we're in. And yes, I agree with Mary about the creative arts dynamic in terms of, but they are small institutions, and perhaps they were quite satisfied, but I doubt that their median income is particularly high. So I am going to go with no, though.
And the answer is an unequivocal no. R² is 0.0004, suggesting there is no relationship whatsoever between these two variables. But why would there be? Are we seriously suggesting that the perceived quality of provision has any bearing on graduate salaries? One to think about there for our DFE and Treasury listeners. It'll be fun to add in other subjects, but likely this would be a slow process, as there are few subject areas that can be cleanly mapped between JACS and the modifications within Leo. Leo is, of course, England only, and therefore so is this plot. And as usual, where the data doesn't exist, I've not plotted it.
And finally, it is that time of year where student union officers change over, with hundreds of new elected representatives taking the reins. So Mark, you were an officer all them years ago. What advice do you have for the incoming student union officers?
Well, it's a really exciting week. I remember it vividly. I was elected to be education officer at the University of Kent in my students' union, full-time sabbatical position, and I was kind of so excited to do this. I'd been a course rep the whole time. I'd been on faculty boards. I'd signed up to every committee. I was on the library information committee. I was I was a bit of an education nerd. Which, incidentally, is where I also got interested in higher education policy, which led me to found Wonkhe. And as a new SAB, I was just thrilled to kind of get to even more committees. Basically, I know it sounds really. I got to go to all sorts of much more high level committees that, just as a lowly course rep, on a kind of the Faculty of Humanities or whatever, you wouldn't get to go to. You got to be on Senate. I mean, that was brilliant. You got to have catch-ups with the PVC for learning and teaching, and that was all super exciting to me. I started the blog about it. It was a precursor to social media, so that no one really could be told about the blog or read it subsequently. But that was definitely the predecessor to Wonkhe. It's a true story. Anyway, so my advice is get to know your university as best as you can. You've got loads of allies across the institution, possibly and sometimes in surprising places. You'll have lots of refuseniks and people who don't think the student union has anything to value, and probably a bit jaded by the kind of the churn of officers coming in every single year. But just ignore that and work with the people who want to make change happen in the university, because whichever university, you can say this about every single one, there will be jam-packed full of those type of people, and you just got to find them, and you've got to work with them, and they'll be delighted that you're on their side as well.
So I think apart from all the things that Mark rightly points out, that actually having agency, that kind of agency in your own university is fantastic. I also think that it's really valuable work experience. For many of student union officers, it'll be the first time they've had a kind of full-time paid role, and lots of learnings for that they can take forward into their career. Not all of them go on to found Wonkhe or become MPs or whatever, and they'll be learning they'll be seeing up close and personal. They'll be seeing the university leadership and how that works. I think that experience of that Mark said, of sitting in on committees and stuff, it's listening and learning how people operate, for people who are probably quite young and quite inexperienced, it's an absolute inoculation of experience of higher level leadership and management that not many people get in their kind of first steps in their career. So I would say grab all that learning and write stuff down, because you forget stuff so easily. Write it down when you see how people interact and how people manage themselves in meetings, how discussions work, how decisions are made, and so on. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for them. I
was a course rep at Oxford Brookes, and actually at sixth form college I was involved in student politics, but no, I didn't get involved in student union stuff when I was an undergrad. I have met many student union folks since, though, and it's often a delight. I think I would say to it'd be kind of for the rabble rousing chat. Speak truth to power, I think, is really important. And it sounds a bit twee, but it's very true. No good deed goes unpunished, I'm afraid. I think that applies across most people working in most areas of higher education, but you don't always get rewarded for the good things that you do. And what I've always found is it's wonderful to meet the enthusiastic, really up for changing the world people who come through. I just think they just need to manage and limit their expectations a little bit. So maybe just try and change 3 things rather than the whole institution, society, and the wider world. I think they need to bring it right down to what's achievable within that year they've got, because the year goes so quickly, and they can make such a difference. But if they get spread too thin, then that's when problems happen. And I think the final thing, which applies to all of us, is make sure that you have your own life as well. because you have so many commitments day and night as a sabbatical officer, that it's really important that you keep some stuff that you can do for yourself to escape from it all, because it does get pretty intense sometimes.
I was an officer at the University of Luton, which now the University of Bedfordshire, that's how old I am. So the University of Luton, I was the vice president of comms when you used to have comms officers that did the magazine and such. And I remember someone put me in this committee meeting, and unlike Mark, this is not my, I didn't really yearn to go to these massive kind of Senate meetings. Quite the opposite. For somehow I found myself around this table of these people who seemed to be speaking this strange language, and I kind of tuned out, and I'm desperately trying to keep on track of the conversation. I still remember to this day the feeling when the vice chancellor turned to me and just looked at me and said, "So what do the students think?" And I had absolutely nothing to say. So my advice would be just always have a few sentences to tell the Vice-Chancellor what the student thinks, just in case that you've tuned out of the conversation.
So one final piece of advice is, you would expect me to say this, but to keep up to date with what's going on in the higher education policy landscape, because it's moving rapidly. Institutions have to be agile and have to come up with solutions to respond to those changes. The Student Union is an important partner in that. And we have a service that helps you do exactly that. We have Wonkhe SUs, which is a subscription service to help keep you informed about what's going on. But more than that, we have training, we have webinars, our WhatsApp group keeps you up to speed all through the day. A whole suite of information services that I think you'll find really valuable. Didn't exist when I was a student officer. I really wish it had. It's a new service for us. We launched this year, and we've already got several dozen student unions who are benefiting from it. So give it a look.
So that is about it for this week. Remember to delve deeper into anything we've discussed today. You'll find the links in the show notes. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast automatically. Just search for The Wonkhe Show via iTunes or your favourite Android podcast directory. Or you can find the feed that you need on wonkhe.com/podcast. And if you'd like to appear as a guest on The Wonkhe Show, do drop us an email on team@wonkhe.com and we will be in touch. So thanks to Mary, to Pete and to Mark and everyone at Team Wonkhe for making it happen. And until next week, stay electable.